Michael Crandell is, as I said before, the founder and CEO of RighScale. And the point I think you should take away is that RighScale has been there from the very beginning with Amazon, back when Amazon was just a command prompt, really. And they made it easier for customers to use the cloud, and they've always kind of been on that edge, showing folks the way. And I think that's what I've always looked at and admired about RighScale, is that they seem to be showing us where things are going. So, Michael, please come on up.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Simone. Thanks to the SVForum for having us here. And I, too, apologize. My name is Michael, to disappoint those of you who thought I was a beautiful French woman named Michelle. But I do trust that somewhere in the world, perhaps at this moment, there's a Simone and a Michelle talking about cloud in a French accent and looking beautiful. So for those for whom RighScale is new, we're a cloud management platform. What we focus on is making it easy for companies to take advantage of the power of infrastructure clouds and the benefits of infrastructure clouds by moving their apps and services onto them, and making it easy really in three ways. One is around automation, and doing that across whether it's a handful of servers or up to tens of thousands of servers and other low-level resources. Second area is really around helping them design and architect applications for cloud environments, because there are differences. There are differences between legacy environments and cloud environments, and I'll talk more about that as we speak a little bit more about enterprise adoption. And then finally, governance. The fact of the matter is today that cloud adoption is a runaway train. Everybody's using it. And it's up to the IT department in larger organizations to begin to get some control and governance around it, which is their natural and proper function, to help make sure that money is being well spent, that for starters you have visibility into knowing what's being spent, and then also to get some reassurance around control of governance and security and also compliance. We do run across many different cloud environments, both public and so-called private or internal provisioning systems. But we were born, as Dave said, right around shortly after AWS was born. And so that, I think all of us would agree, is the dominant platform out there with the most features, the most users, et cetera. And that also is true in terms of what RighScale manages and our history. So I've covered some of these different areas. It's really quite a broad platform. And one of the key takeaways, I think, is, again, this point that so much adoption is occurring that it's no longer a choice to say we're not going to adopt cloud. Probably 3 or 4 years ago, that was a statement we heard pretty frequently from larger companies. We're not doing cloud. Often it was, we're not doing cloud, it's not secure. But as you saw from Simone's examples and a few that I'll show, the consumption and the adoption has really increased. Here's just a selection of customers running on RighScale, many of them also running on Amazon Web Services. And you can see from glancing across the names, it's a big mixture, from startups, maybe some of which you've never heard of, up to lots of enterprise company names. Now, I think it's important to acknowledge that the kinds of apps and services and workloads that are being deployed varies a lot. And that, in fact, is part of the power of infrastructure as a service, is that there are many different kinds of applications and services that you can build. So there's a lot of variation there, and I'd like to pick out just a few examples. But first, to talk about what I think is a central driving principle of enterprise adoption. And that is that most enterprises today are looking to combine whatever they're doing internally with cloud usage. It's called by different names. Some people call it internal provisioning. Some people call it private cloud. I'm not going to get into the argument around the terminology. But the important recognition is that larger companies are trying to combine use of internal resources with external resources. And so it creates a situation where the ideal for deploying workloads is that you have a choice of where you run them. And that's a lot of the work that we've been pouring into this hybrid scenario, is that IT or a business manager or a developer can have access to multiple resource pools and can go down really a series of requirements, a filtering process, if you will, to determine what's the best place to run the workload. And that filter may include things like geographical location, either for performance reasons or for legal reasons. For example, if you're a Swiss bank, you need to store data in Switzerland. It may include compliance and security kinds of features. It may include performance. It may include cost or price. There are many, many factors that enter into a decision of where's the best place to deploy an application or service. I'd like to go through 3 quick examples just to add on to the ones that Simone gave you and to try and underscore what kinds of larger companies are deploying on the cloud. One of them is Sony Music. So Sony Music runs their artist sites using RighScale actually in AWS. All 3 of these examples in respect for the topic, all of these are Amazon Web Service customers also. And the reason that they've used the cloud for this is pretty, in some ways, straightforward 3-tier web type architecture, although they also do run e-commerce on these sites. But they get new artists all the time. And so they need a quick templatized way to fire up new websites. These are usually multi-tenant websites in the sense that multiple artists are represented on each site. So it's a shared infrastructure. They need a way to accommodate new artists if they hit a limit to launch a new cluster and to accommodate anywhere 50, 100 new artists. But they also have to be able to respond to the fact that musical artists do interesting things, and interesting things happen to them. And those often are events that create a lot of interest and what are called flash crowds, right? Suddenly there's an event in some artist's life, whether it's they have a hit record or they get arrested or whatever happens, and a lot of interest suddenly happens, so they need to be able to scale. So these templatized sites that they're deploying also need to be able to accommodate flash crowds and the load that that creates. Second example is a company called Pearson. You probably have heard of Pearson. They're the publisher of The Economist and the Financial Times. And they have a division around digital learning that handles online education for students. And so essentially this is an example of an enterprise using the cloud for what I think of as SaaS enablement, or software as a service enablement, of delivering their software. The software was originally kind of a single tenant kind of application, but using the cloud, software companies like that can really get a lot of benefit of quick deployment and delivery to their customers without going through the whole process of completely rewriting the system to become a multi-tenant native SaaS system. So they've used it for that, and even more so, the representative from Pearson came and spoke at our RighScale conference recently, and he spoke about how much they had integrated the cloud systems into their own internal IT, their ticketing system, their support system, their existing monitoring system for their infrastructure. So it's a great example, I think, of how an enterprise is using cloud and at the same time very tightly integrating it with existing IT systems. Final example is Intercontinental Hotel Group, or IHG. Probably all of us have stayed in one of their hotels. They needed to create a consumer-facing website for their reservation system for the Chinese market. I think it supports about over 60 hotels in China. And so they wanted to do this without going in and renting data center space and so on. And what they did was they built this site pretty quickly, deployed it using RighScale on Amazon's Tokyo region for performance reasons. And they did all of this from Atlanta, Georgia, and really never had to go there. So another example of what I like to think of as agile marketing in the enterprise, the ability to use the cloud to create consumer-facing sites and services all around the globe. So with that, those are 3 quick examples. And in following you, Simone, I'll make it quick so we have time for questions afterward. But thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, Michael. Okay, up next will be George Reese, like I said, the CTO and founder of Enstratus. And like RighScale, Enstratus has a platform to help customers manage their applications in the cloud. They also have the option to run the cloud application management platform on-premise, and have recently had some partnerships with the likes of Dell and other big IT companies. So, George, come on up, share your experience.
Thanks. So I'm going to talk a little bit first about timelines of enterprise adoption, and probably the most important thing to get out of what I'm saying here might be that the enterprise has always been using cloud, at least as long as I've been involved, which is since 2007. The funny thing is that for a while they just wouldn't admit it. And it sort of came in two phases. The first phase I'd call financial. The second phase I'd classify as agility, and we're in the agility phase now. And it breaks down into sort of starting in the 2006, 2007, but really 2008, 2009, where you had enterprises going in and deploying, what I'm referring to as IT annoyances. Of course, startups and everything, we're getting all of the attention in terms of being able to go from zero to, thousands of virtual machines in a short period of time with very little capital outlay. But what was going on in this 2008-2009 timeframe, of course, was the financial crisis, the loss of access to capital. And so things like dev test and marketing applications were getting the short shrift because they weren't able to capitalize themselves to be done. So to give a couple of interesting examples from this, one would be, our first customer was a company you'll probably recognize called Monsanto. That was working with another large company called Carlson Marketing to deploy a short-lived marketing application into the cloud. It was a loyalty program aimed at farmers, and it was only designed to last, I think, 12 months. Maybe it was 2 years. I forget the exact details. But the point is it was a finite lifetime application. So doing a capital outlay in 2008 for this was a non-starter, and IT didn't have the attention to give such a thing. So Carlson and Monsanto decided to work together and put this into Amazon Cloud. But there was a funny little catch to that. It had to live up to all of the enterprise security controls and constraints that all the other applications that they normally deploy behind their firewall had to live up to. So our function in this particular thing was to sit outside of Amazon, watch over the loyalty application, make sure it was living up to those controls, and while still benefiting from all the things they were doing in the cloud. So that's one example of finance being a driver in 2008, an IT annoyance being marketing. Another type of it sort of fits an IT annoyance, but is really the third-party small company developing for the enterprise. So the enterprise has decided to allow some third-party startup in a lot of cases, or or just a very small vendor who doesn't compete by building out big infrastructure. And one example of that for us was a reinsurance company who was doing a lot of number crunching, and they needed to spin up, spin down servers to do all this number crunching. But again, enterprise being what it is, enterprise IT wanted to make sure it was, again, living up to controls. around security, audit controls, that sort of thing, even though, again, the data being crunched was anonymized and thus did not fit into your typical governance and compliance issues. So, this IT annoyances phase is things we don't want to worry about. It's not governed by any of the compliance issues that an enterprise might be faced with. Let's go ahead and let it go into the cloud and not think about it so that we can focus on our core stuff, as long as somebody is out there making sure that the things we care about are being dealt with. The second part, 2009-2010 timeframe, we start to evolve from the financial focus to the agility focus, and this is what I call the rogue IT phase. An interesting side note on all of this is that there are of course enterprises that today are just in the IT annoyances phase. When I talk about these phases, I talk about the leading adopters in the enterprise. In the 2009-2010 phase, the early adopter enterprises were finding that the people who had had success with the IT annoyances were now going off and doing a whole bunch of things in the cloud because they learned during the earlier phases or from other people who had gone through the earlier phases that, hey, I can go around IT, same as with BYOD, go into the cloud and start doing stuff. And one of the things we would see in 2009, 2010 is I'd go to things like a cloud camp or some other conference, and I would tell, we'd get CIOs and stuff that insisted we're not going, as Simone actually talked about, we're not in the cloud, we'll never go in the cloud, and I could go in there and make a bet with them and say, yes, you are in the cloud, you just don't know it. And that was almost certainly the case in 2009, 2010. All enterprises were doing some level of experimentation, generally led by more autonomous business units like marketing and sales, putting stuff out there. And come last year, IT became aware of this. You stopped hearing CIOs insist that they weren't in the cloud, stopped insisting that they were never going to go into the cloud. And this phase really is focused on agility. It's where we've decided that we are going to build out a private cloud platform to rein in all these people who have been going out there with the objective of providing a cloud service behind the firewall that meets the agility objectives of the people who have gone rogue. Probably with the objective not necessarily, well, depending, I guess it varies from enterprise to enterprise. I mean, on the one hand, you have the enterprises that are more enlightened that are doing this because they think they can offer a value behind the firewall for certain kinds of applications and want to have an and strategy at this point, a private cloud plus a public cloud. Then there are those who are thriving under the delusion that they can bring all of these people behind the firewall and can ignore the public cloud. I'd say early part of 2011, it was more the delusion type, and as we evolved into 2012, most of the companies we're dealing with are more the enlightened side that are looking at this problem as an and problem. Private cloud for the right things, public cloud for the right things, and be smart about which is which. Autodesk is probably a good example of one of those enlightened organizations that are taking an and philosophy. They have a bunch of Amazon accounts. They have a private cloud, and what they're trying to do with us is actually get a single view across what they're doing in the actually multiple private clouds and in all of their Amazon accounts, and be able to govern them with the same view, and in either case, depending on the business need, offer the end customer, which is generally the internal business units, the sort of agility that cloud offers, but in the case of private cloud, offer certain levels of performance or governance that may not be available in the public cloud. The final phase, or not the final phase, but the phase we're in right now, and I don't know how long it goes, is, but we've just started seeing some enterprises who are taking the approach of going, we're going to take a public cloud first approach, and then everything sort of has to prove it goes into the private cloud. So the idea being that, again, leveraging a management tool like us to provide the correct decision-making framework on what constitutes the right thing with a bias towards public cloud, but essentially recognizing that the public cloud is a critical part of the internal enterprise infrastructure. And before I go on the next slide here, the one thing I'd like to add is that the phase beyond this is, I guess, reconciliation day between the cloud world and the ITIL world. For the most part, the cloud world has tried to avoid fighting the battle with the ITIL world, because a lot of what ITIL represents is destructive to the cloud value proposition. However, ITIL is serving a very critical purpose in most enterprises, and as cloud becomes more foundational to the way enterprise is going to do business, there's going to have to be some give and take on both sides in terms of identifying what the proper role of ITIL in a cloudy infrastructure is. So, looking at the cloud computing landscape, when we talk about public clouds, one of the interesting things is that in our experience, only Amazon has proven itself at scale, and that may not be a fair way of wording it. The right way would be that Amazon has achieved such an immense scale at this point that is beyond what anybody else can imagine at this point. And that is why they have continued to be this, 8 million pound gorilla out there, and everybody else keeps having a hard time catching up. And an interesting thing is that Stratus ended up being this multi-cloud management layer because I wrote an abstraction layer back in 2008 to separate Stratus from Amazon, because I was certain in 2008 that there was no way in 2010 that we'd be using a bookseller as our infrastructure provider. The reality is the value is it's made it really easy for us to adopt to new clouds. The interesting thing is that Amazon continues to lead the market in terms of innovating and scale. Now, the interesting thing is there have been some interesting challengers coming to market lately. Google is the one that has proven that it can operate at scale as a business. The question is, can they operate at scale as an infrastructure cloud provider? We don't know the answer to that yet. HP's got a very interesting cloud, Rackspace as well on OpenStack. Question again is, can they operate it at the same scale as Amazon? And then Microsoft also, from a very different approach, is doing some interesting things with their Azure platform and infrastructure clouds. Some innovators to watch out for, DataPipe and Joyent. They're taking some different approaches to cloud that may drive features in other clouds, and then I don't have an answer on the scale thing for them either. And then, of course, from a legacy perspective, there are a whole bunch of applications out there that really don't care about scaling infrastructure. What they care about is stable, predictable infrastructure. And I don't mean that to suggest that everybody else up there isn't stable or predictable, but ones that, what I mean by stable and predictable, are ones that follow the traditional IT structure and domain model, and those would be BlueLock, IBM OpSource, and they're going to have a role in any sort of big enterprise picture, because we believe the big enterprise picture is as I put up here, a mix of private and public cloud. There won't be the only public enterprise. There's not going to be an only private enterprise. And in fact, we think that what a mature enterprise cloud looks like is it actually is probably at least 2 private clouds and probably at least 2 public clouds. And they're brought together in a hybrid mix, and then you add platform as a service on top of that. So that's our view.
Great. Thank you so much, George.
Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, and just because we are running behind here, we're going to have to hold off questions until the lunch break. And thank you very much for your presentations, folks. Some folks have asked if we were going to make the presentations available online, and we will do so as the speakers give them to us. So we will make them available for you. Okay, so next up we have a panel. Now this is a panel that I chose. This is a topic that I'm particularly interested in, and the topic is open data, open PaaS, and open cloud. And our panelists, I would like to go ahead and welcome them to come on up and join me up here on the panel, are Dr. Amir Awadallah of Cloudera, Kyle McDonald of Canonical, Isaac Roth of Red Hat, and James Waters of VMware. So come on up, guys, and join me. And there's Kyle. Great. I'll tell you what, do you mind moving over just one? Do that.
Are you going to sit here?
And Kyle, you leave me this.
I'm where my sign says.
Leave me this chair right here. Okay, there you go. Thank you. Right there. There you go. Thanks, guys. Yeah. Cloud-based tool for panels. Ooh, there's an idea, an unpanel. So, okay, folks. Well, what we're going to do here is we're going to keep this a little bit lively. I have some questions that I've prepared for the panel, but I don't want to stick just to the prepared questions. We're also going to give you an opportunity at the end to ask questions as well. So be thinking of what you'd like to ask. And first of all, what I'd like to start off with is just simply a couple of comments about what is an open cloud and why is it important. Just keep it brief, and then I'll also ask the panelists the same questions. And first of all, the open cloud. First of all, the open cloud is a concept that doesn't necessarily exist. There's no spec that says here's what an open cloud is. Some folks who talk about open cloud will say it has to do with open source. Other folks think it has to do with portability. And my personal opinion is that if you ask customers what they really wanted from an open concept in cloud computing, it would be that they'd like not to be locked in, and they'd like to be able to use technologies that transfer from one vendor to another. And so at the essence of openness, I think, is to unlock a lot of the innovation that is happening on one cloud or in one application, and help that innovation, that technology, run in other environments or in other vendors. And this benefits everyone because as a customer, when you invest in some resource, one particular cloud or one particular type of technology, if you need to use other clouds and other technologies, but you can't take that innovation with you, you've lost the opportunity. And the same goes for data. A lot of times data needs to run in one environment. You've already got it, perhaps, in a system that you've had for many years, or maybe you've created a new web application that's collecting a lot of data, and the location where that data exists may not be the right data or location for you to use it in the long run, and so you might need to move it. And the one particular example I'd like to use is one very brought up earlier around photo sharing. There's a lot of folks who have realized that photos are sort of the killer app for social networks. You saw Facebook acquire Instagram right before it went public. Why? Because that was a very important piece of social networks. And you also heard James earlier, I think it was, talk about how your photos can be uploaded to Facebook, but you really don't have any tools to take them down or move them around. So using that as an example that I think all of you might be able to relate to, how can you solve that problem? How can you make it so that you're not stuck forever with one place to put your photos? And there was a startup that spun out of Yahoo. Actually, it was an engineer from Yahoo created a startup called the Open Photo Project. And I invited them to speak at another conference I was at recently. And the concept is very simple. When you go to upload your photos, they give you the choice where you want to upload it. And the software that lets you view the photos is open source and can run on any cloud. So this gives you the choice as the customer where the application is actually running that is managing your photos, and then you can choose where those photos actually exist. And so that's the example I wanted to give you. Now, on our panel, we have four folks who I've either met, again, in China or all around the world, or have had many engaging discussions with. So we've invited them particularly for their expertise in this general area. We have two panelists who are in the platform as a service area. And so platform as a service, for those of you who are not familiar, is more like you've heard of Azure or App Engine. And it's a place where you can put your code and you don't have to worry about virtual machine instances. And I personally believe that's a very important part of the future of cloud. We also have a panelist from Canonical, which is an operating system company. They have and distribute Ubuntu. And Ubuntu as an operating system, they help distribute cloud as a part of their operating system. And so they have a lot of tools to help you run applications, across many. Automate the deployment of applications, which the automation tools can be run really anywhere. And then finally, we have a speaker from Cloudera. Cloudera is really the company that first brought us Hadoop to the public market. And of course, if you know Hadoop, there's a lot of data there. So we have with us a lot of expertise in data and application portability, and so let's get started. So I'm going to just jump down here. So we've got about a half an hour, and I want to try to keep this moving. So what I'd like you to do is just at the very beginning, share with us what you think open cloud is, just quickly, and how does it relate to what you're doing? And James, why don't we go ahead and start with you?
Yeah, sure. So I come from the platform perspective, so I'll speak to that. And there's a lot of things I could say about the benefits of an open platform. I think with Cloud Foundry, specifically the project I work on, one of the immediate benefits that people have gotten is that as opposed to, say, App Engine or Heroku or Azure, there's been an ecosystem that's sprouted up of other people who offer this and people who help orchestrate it behind your firewall. And that has happened in terms of like 1 year. And so that multi-cloud ability that we've been able to generate, not through just one product, but rather an ecosystem with lots of people bringing their own ideas and innovation to it, has really surprised and shocked even us inside the company of how fast that's taken off. And I think the benefit there is that when the code is open and deploying it is free to everybody, that ecosystem of providers quickly surpasses what anyone at, say, Microsoft with a 2-year project plan can do and imagine and execute on. So that's been really amazing. We have a partner, AppFog, that now has reported in only 6 months since their GA, they're now at 60,000 users and applications. And that's a company that otherwise wouldn't have had our software, but because our software is open, they're able to go execute on that plan very fast. Another company, Tier 3, just took $10 million of additional venture funding today. They've landed companies like Intel, other large logos. Warner Music has spoken publicly about how they want to use the Cloud Foundry instance of Tier 3. All of this doesn't happen because I get on a plane and go sell anything. I mean, I try to help germinate the ecosystem as best I can. This happens because it's open.
So you're jumping right to my next question, which is, how does open play a role in your ecosystem? So let's just make that the question. Isaac, since you're also in the platform as a service space, why don't we skip to you next?
you defined open as the ability to port an application from place to place, and that's an important aspect of it. James brought up the aspect of having people be able to use your code essentially for free. I don't know that it needs to be open for that to be the case.
Well, they modify it too. I mean, so AppFog brought PHP to it, so I didn't give a full detail on that. And Tier 3 brought .NET to it.
I think an important aspect of open is community contribution, a collaboration around a common idea. And I think a great example of this that we can all relate to is Wikipedia, right? It's open and everybody collaborates, and the greater whole is a part of that, benefits from that, and everybody feels that they can be part of it, they can benefit from it, so you can give and take to something that you couldn't create by yourself. And if you contrast that idea of like Wikipedia to something that we can relate to, like the TomTom maps. These have been in the news recently, right? They're licensed. Yes, they are extended and modified by various vendors like Apple or TomTom or other navigational providers. But those providers, in an attempt to differentiate their services, don't contribute back their modifications to the core. And that's very much the case in certain ecosystems, James, where it's a panel.
Was that a dig? I haven't seen the OpenShift ecosystem yet. As soon as I see it,
I'll tell you what. Yeah,
I'd love to
early
meet
for
it.
digs. Let's get everyone out there first.
So
But
I think collaboration is really important in Open Cloud.
Okay.
okay, that's a fair addition. So not just the portability of your application and your data, but also collaboration, whether it's open source or not.
Right.
Okay. All right. So next, I'm going to ask Kyle. Go ahead and share with us. Give us a little background again about how you're involved with open from the Ubuntu perspective.
Okay, so I'm going to come at this from an infrastructure layer. So Ubuntu, we have an interesting position. We are the third most popular operating system in the world. We are one of the largest guest instances in most major clouds. I wouldn't say everyone, but if you look at Azure that just launched, Ubuntu was one of the primary guests for it. If you look at Google Compute Engine in its betas, we're there. Amazon, we've been a very prevalent part of this. So we've kind of built, built a base layer that developers and people who are using the cloud can sort of count on within the guest, and that's been a very powerful part of our plan and our story. And so when we look at the open cloud, or when you talk about these sorts of things, what we're actually looking at from our perspective is making sure that the base layer is something that developers and people who are building something on top of a Cloud Foundry.
Cloud Foundry is built on Ubuntu 10.4 right now.
It's something that they can depend on. It is a sort of a layer that you just accept. And so that's one part of our strategy. The second part of our strategy has been to also make that same experience for companies who are deploying clouds inside their company. And that's being done with an emerging and rapidly maturing OpenStack position that companies like Red Hat and now VMware are definitely participating in the ecosystem for.
Great example of collaboration.
So it's we've been doing OpenStack now for 2 years. We distributed it as an actual product, so we've productized it, and we've been helping companies build that. And so a key part of that is that when you're building an OpenStack cloud, you're depending on certain layers to be the base that you know and exist. And so Ubuntu is one of those layers that you build OpenStack on top of. So we've kind of we've sort of taken this approach that you have to be open and tell people how to build on top. You have to give them trust that when they build on top of you, they can depend on you to behave a certain way, to commit to being open and transparent about what you're doing. Because otherwise they won't build on you, or they'll have bad experiences and they don't come back. And the people who suffer from that lack of innovation are customers who want to use the solutions. So that's a little bit of how we do it. So we spend lots and lots and lots of time on communication, lots and lots of time on sort of integration, and then lots of time working with a great community to get things done.
So when I hear you talking about the operating system and you talk about infrastructure as a service and platform as a service, it occurs to me that what open means at each one of those levels might actually be different.
Radically different, yeah.
Not just in the players, but perhaps even in the approach. For example, sometimes your customers who download and use Ubuntu, you're the primary provider. Other times, if you're running in another cloud, you're a VM. You're running inside of a VM, or in another cloud. And so just there alone in infrastructure as a service is very different. And I would imagine that the concept of open helps you play a part in those different roles rather than being kind of stuck down a vendor-specific approach of here's how our stack works type of scenario. Okay, so we're going to get to Emir in just a second, but I wanted to quickly follow up on that question around not just at the application layer, but we're hearing more and more, so we're leading into your topic here. We're hearing more and more about how important data is. And there's a problem with data is that it actually can get very big very fast, and it's hard to move. But even if you put aside the fact that large amounts of data are hard to move, you still have other problems around moving data. That's just simply around formats and proprietary formats and integration. So when it comes to open, just because the software is open doesn't necessarily mean that the customers still have that much choice. So how do you see data playing a role in how open or how cloud computing is being adopted on various platforms? And we'll start with Isaac this time.
Well, it's true that it's hard to move data. Just it takes a lot of time, and you might have to reformat it. And I think we haven't come up with, although there are some approaches to try to normalize data, the prevailing approach right now seems to be to leave the data where it lies and make it openly accessible. And that is actually where the open platform vendors, of which you have 4 here, representing also a really great number of cool projects, are adding a lot of value. I was just thinking about this panel. It's really cool, right? You have experts here in some really amazing, totally open enabling technologies: OpenStack, Hadoop, OpenShift, Cloud Foundry, Linux, right? And tons of other projects around those. Like, that's basically what powers the cloud. Like, that's awesome. And so whether your data is a runtime, is an app, it's the code that runs an app, or whether your data is like a big collection of geodata, or something like Wikipedia, that corpus of contributed text and images, you can leave that where it is, and then you have an open way to access it because you have built it on open APIs, open technologies. So I think that's like the best we can do right now while we can't move data around.
Okay, who wants to go next?
I mean, I think there's a what's most interesting is if you look at the places where data is, and you look at there's the emerging patterns to move applications and the stuff that you're building in the platform to be as close to the data as possible. And so I think there's an interesting trend there where you're going to see, I think there's a reason why lots of enterprises are looking at platform as a service, simply because it's a great way to either A, consume, or be able to add to data. And so where the data is, I think, is going to attract a lot more attention in terms of what you build, both at an infrastructure layer and a platform layer.
Now, James, one of your peers over at VMware talks about data gravity.
He actually went to Warner Music to go build Cloud Foundry there, Dave McCurry.
Really?
Yeah, so the ecosystem got big enough that someone hired somebody away.
Well, that happens to the best of us. So, but you want to talk about that concept?
About data gravity? Oh, I would never ever venture to talk about data gravity when my best buddy Dave is the expert on it.
Well, okay,
but
he's not here.
Here's what I will say, and I think you described it well, and then I'd love to hear from Amir on it. I think there are de facto and de jure reasons that data can't be moved and used. And the de facto reason is kind of data gravity, is that it's actually very hard to physically move it. It's there, it's not formatted the right way, it's not interoperable between two things. And that's always been with us. I'm actually more concerned about the increasing de jure reasons that we can't consume data. LinkedIn, Netflix, Twitter, Facebook, you name it, all of the big platforms, Bloomberg, have said you're not allowed to have access to our data unless you consume it in very specific ways, under very specific terms. And most importantly, you're not allowed to use it in any kind of recombinant fashion where you plug it into another application and don't consume our end value. And that's something we could have a whole panel about, but I think it shows that we're kind of early in this world of web plus data, and people are playing with kind of the old rules, and I've coined a cheesy term for it, API mercantilism, because essentially people are never sharing low-level raw resources. They only want to share finished goods. Here's your Netflix as a service, as opposed to having access to what does James like to view, which maybe you could consume through an API. They never give that up.
So let's talk about a very open data platform, HDFS. It's an incredibly open storage system for large files, or any kind of file, really. And Amir was with Cloudera. Cloudera created HDFS. Well, the folks who founded Cloudera created HDFS. How do you see that or any other part of Hadoop playing a role in the success that Hadoop has had?
So I will link it back first to the question you started with at the beginning, which is open, and what does open really mean? Agree with you, open means two things. It means, which is a theme that many of the panelists here echoed as well, open means portability, meaning ability to move across systems. So in other words, countering the vendor lock-in. And then second means innovation. By having your system be open source and open, the code is available out there, you get innovation. You get your customers fixing your product for you and adding features to the product for you. That just doesn't get better than that in terms of innovation. But the most important thing, actually, so not all customers does that, by the way. The number of customers who can actually contribute to systems like this is not everybody out there, but still, it's definitely better than just one company focused on making the product better. But the key theme of non-vendor lock-in is very, very important and very fundamental to this movement overall for all of us here on this panel, is the way we earn our business year over year over year by having that customer stay loyal and stay happy with us and keep paying us is not because we have their applications and their data locked up in a system that's proprietary to us that only we control, but rather it's because they're truly happy with us. Because a year from now, if they're not happy with us, they can leave me and they can go work with any other vendor that supports that open system other than me. And in many ways, it keeps you honest to a very core tenet of that's really what customer retention and customer acquisition should be about. It's about keeping them happy, as opposed to coming in a year later and increasing your prices or changing your pricing model in one way or another and pissing off your customers, despite them originally being not happy with you at the first place.
So VRAM, anyone? VRAM?
Say again?
Sorry.
I don't want to mention names about any individual companies per se. So that's a very core ethos and tenet behind the open movement in general, is we have to earn our business. And if you think about it, it's actually a very fundamental thing and a very good thing, because technology could be replicated. Like somebody else can replicate technology and build something similar to yours or better than yours. But customer happiness is very hard to replicate. So if you work on that dimension and ensure that your customers are really happy, then you're in a very, very good position. So now moving on to open data specifically. Open data specifically is about innovation. And we have many, many examples of open data and how it led to innovation. One is, for example, the GPS satellite network. When that was opened up, just look at that. Now there's a massive multi-billion-dollar industry built around that data source now being an open data source. Same thing with the weather. When the weather information was opened up, there's many, many companies now built around that, et cetera, et cetera. So it's really about innovation. Same thing within companies. Within companies, there is these organizations that sometimes hoard their data too much. And that hoarding ends up causing a lack of innovation within these companies. And it's a very fine balance, obviously, because some of this data could be very proprietary in nature, could be very sensitive in nature in terms of personally identifiable information, et cetera, et cetera. So you have to strike the right balance, but the answer definitely is not to hoard everything. Otherwise, you won't get any innovation within your organization. So HDFS, which you alluded to, and Hadoop overall, the ecosystem overall with HBase and many other technologies in there, they on one side speak to the side of we're providing you with an open system, and hence you as a customer now have the choice to move with any other vendor a year from now if you're not happy with the vendor you're working with. And our motivation is always about making you happy, otherwise you won't renew with us. And then second, the fundamental concepts behind HDFS and Hadoop are about enabling the organization to consolidate all of their data in a system where it's easier for them to break down the hoarding walls, to break down the silos between the different groups within their organization, hence enabling the open data kind of promise inside organizations. I hope that answered your question.
Well, that's a very good start.
On this topic of open data, the U.S. government CTO, the federal CTO, gave a terrific talk about a week ago. Did anyone hear that in San Francisco? Where he described all the open data initiatives that the U.S. government is taking right now, and they actually organize these events called Data Palooza, which he said, would you ever think that you'd hear a U.S. government official using the word Data Palooza, where they invite people to come and hack on their data, all the government open data that they can get into publicly available sources. And just to this point about HDFS, one of the things that can be an issue during Data Palooza hackathon is the data being in all these different formats and people having to overcome the formatting. But aside from that, he cited example after example of amazing things. Very, very popular iPhone apps, healthcare applications that help doctors, like millions of doctors, that were developed using this open data corpus.
Yeah.
So check that out if you haven't seen that.
That's quite amazing. With all the travels I've done with the cloud camps around the world, I think I've been into over 100. Well, we've had over 100 cities where we've had cloud camps around the world. And the one thing that I always feel very happy about being American is that this is the kind of thing that really only happens here. Yeah. Unconferences, hackathons, and this kind of sharing of innovation in such an open way. Of course, it happens in other places around the world, of course, but just not at all at the scale that we do here. And it's, I think, a way that we really are leading the world in a very strong way. Okay, so I'm going to open up the questions in just a moment, but before I do, I just want to give you a chance to talk about my favorite subject, which is around platform as a service. And by the way, I consider Hadoop to be a platform as a service. And I want to give you a chance to talk about agree or disagree with me in that I believe that, James hates it when I say this, but I believe that infrastructure as a service is actually very similar to what DOS was before Windows existed. We're in the house that DOS built, I guess you could say. And I really do believe that. If you look back, we were trying to figure out how to write applications that could deal with these new things called PCs. And DOS, made that possible for us in a very rudimentary way, but it certainly was not the end product. And then once we figured out what that looked like, along came the Mac with its visual interface and Windows. And I think platform as a service is essentially Windows. So that it's that UI. It abstracts all the complex things. It gives developers rich tools and gadgets to write code in their applications to, and it just allows them to just write their code and push it up into the cloud. And so I really do believe that whether it's application developers or systems that use Hadoop, that getting to that point is I think that the goal for all of us to be able to rapidly innovate and not have to worry about all the underpinnings of the infrastructure. So any thoughts on that? And if you want to relate it back to your own products, go ahead.
I'll start first. I mean, if you, to rephrase what you're saying you were at the beginning of this movement, then 100% agree with you. We're way at the beginning, in the same way that DOS was the beginning. And there's lots of innovation and functionality that we need to be added over time to truly deliver on the promise of a platform as a service. We're getting there, and we're seeing lots of improvements happening across all of these different layers. But yeah, we're not there yet. I agree with you there.
I guess the key to this is making the balance between providing really awesome automation and higher level capabilities. Like, Windows had, here's an example from Windows, right? You had a class in Windows where you could just say, make me a window. And it would come with a close box and a minimize box and the ability to go behind other windows, and it would refresh when it did all that for you. And so as a developer, that was awesome, right? Like, you didn't have to write all that graphical code yourself. But what happened when you did that too was that your window looked like everybody else's window, right? Like, and if you needed a special scroll bar, or you had to custom code that. And I just want to bring this back to the topic here with this. Openness allows for that to happen, because in that case of the Windows window class, you couldn't actually change it. So what's cool about building on an open developer platform, something that we're all advocating for here, is that you do have that capability to push to push the envelope on what you can actually create using these common facilities that only one person has to get right, and then everybody else can use. And then, of course, the trouble with that becomes entropy, right? If too many people do that, then it's like, well, which one's the one that makes everyone feel at home, right? So we're in that place. I think very much right now we're in that place with platform as a service, where the question is, like, how much stuff can the platforms do for you? And then if they do too much for you, everyone wants to go underneath and build it their own way and customize it. And that's constantly changing thing right now.
So I definitely see PaaS and infrastructure as a service as being, I get the DOS analogy, but I think we're looking at two very different worlds for just a little while. That there's still a lot of work you want to do in infrastructure as a service, a lot of work you want to do. I think about this maybe a little bit biasly, but I think about it from an Ubuntu perspective, where we could do lots of stuff at the IaaS level, making an infrastructure as a service work, understanding how APIs are published, getting them, getting that stuff expanded and building the ecosystem. But we're also integrating that with a PaaS is like moving two giant semi-trucks, and somehow wanting, like in an action movie, I imagine trying to be the guy jumping between them. It's a hard balancing act because they're two very, very fast-moving targets. And
why don't you just share, I should have brought this up earlier, tell us about Juju and why that is so important kind of at the in-between stage.
Okay, so I was going to, so Juju is our deployment technology. So we've sort of built Juju into Ubuntu, and we've got it, it's been adopted by a number of other operating systems now. And it sort of exists as a way to go in and be able to very quickly sort of deploy applications and deploy runtimes and deploy across clouds.
On infrastructure as a service.
On infrastructure as a service. It does bare metal as well through LXC and a couple of others, but for the high level purpose, and for the high level purpose, we'll think about it, as clouds. Working with cloud providers like Azure and Amazon, for example, and Rackspace, we'll just pick those three. You can very easily use Juju to go deploy a workload at any one of those three and have it be the exact same experience. So your Juju deploy of, normally I would give so your Juju deploy of Hadoop.
So again, here's yet another layer that we didn't even mention in this panel until just now, where we've got infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, data. And in between infrastructure service and your application, you could also take the deploy it with configuration scripts and that sort of thing, which also can have its own ecosystem of open.
Right. I mean, there's a whole set of system management stuff that comes with this, and this is, I think, why I said these are two very fast-moving targets. Because in the PaaS world, you're sort of you're having to build the platform, the runtime, the mechanics of just how that works, which I think is a fantastic challenge, right? And so, nice job, two of you guys. Good job. It's a fantastic challenge, right? These are very big ecosystems, and making them work and building the runtimes is a huge thing. How you go deploy it, how you go manage it, from a manageability thing, that's all of the Puppet, all of the Chef world. And then there's Bosch, Juju. There's lots of moving pieces there, right? And those moving pieces are in many parts how you go and deploy it at bare metal, but also how you go and deploy it at different infrastructures, and then how you deploy it across different clouds who are shaping things in their own certain way because they figured out how they're going to make money in their own certain ways. And so lots of moving targets.
Make money.
And thank you very much for explaining that. And then in the interest of time, I'll just go ahead and move on to James and give you the final panelist word.
Oh, that's dangerous.
I know.
Yeah, I mean, so when I think about this, I think we've got marketing terms for lots of different layers, and those are been awesome at marketing, and they get people to come to conferences and speak in a similar kind of paradigm. The thing that separates it for me is when a customer comes to you with a problem. So Intel came to us and they said, hey, our problem is that virtualization automation has gotten us from a 6-month to a 6-week to a 6-minute provision time for a VM, and that's really helped, and all the tools at that layer have helped. The problem is it hasn't compressed our application development and deployment as much. And what we really want to do with our next phase of investments in our platform and with Cloud Foundry is take us, ultimately the aspiration is to go from idea to getting it to production in a day. And if you're still dealing with a lot of the lower level layers, that aspiration will not work because you could spend a day working on your configuration, et cetera, and it may be automated and faster. So I tend to think about these in terms of what problem you're really trying to solve. And the people that are making big bets on platform as a service right now really want to get ideas into production faster, and they're willing to standardize to make that happen. They're taking things like virtual machines and networks and a lot of that lower level configuration language out of their developers' hands, and they're saying, we only want you to deal with applications, with services, with APIs, and we're going to give you a platform that gives you easy access, provisioning, and manipulation of those concepts in a rapid fashion. So that's the perspective I take on it. It's really about what problem customers are trying to solve. If you've got a big monolithic app that you really want to do better orchestration on, and you already have that app and it's there, maybe platform as a service is not the right way to go.
Okay, great. Well, we only have a few minutes here, so does anybody? We have 2 minutes, so we'll try to get 1 or 2 questions. I don't know if we'll have time for more than one, but from the audience, does anybody have a question that you would like to ask the panel? Okay, first hand up right there in the back. We got a microphone running to you.
Okay, Angela Hay, TechVisor. About 25 years ago, portability was a huge thing, and yet enterprises actually had it as a check feature, but really never moved things from, say, Oracle on HP to Oracle on an IBM mainframe or something. The many, many examples of where portability never paid off. So does anyone have any examples in this sort of new cloud computing of an enterprise that has actually moved their data? And I can see you can replicate data centers and want to have a backup data center which has the same data in a different place on a different architecture. But I can't even move, say, pictures from one Windows machine to another reliably, despite Microsoft providing tools to move things. And things like Box and Dropbox find that people will pay after their free storage because they don't want to move it from one thing to another. So is it really just a marketing feature to say that things are portable? Or do you think that really people are going to move their data?
Okay, I'm just going to make a very quick stab and then let somebody else answer too. But I think you answered your question a little bit. 25 years ago, we didn't have this shared resource that we could use as an in-between point when we wanted to share our data. And there's companies taking advantage of that to help us solve those problems, namely, Dropbox and iCloud and SkyDrive. They're now there.
And Gmail.
And Gmail is.
I just moved 15 years of email to Gmail. All of my email history is in there now.
That's right. And it's a very. I think the cloud is the internet, the web, whatever you want to call it, is the difference. And because of all of that, we have something to collectively share with each other. And maybe sometimes it's just from you to another person, but that also means that you can be you to another you, right?
Well, there's also a model of, so the services model and the service provider sort of getting it as a service. I hate to go too far into that, but I think that makes a big difference because you're kind of deciding on a monthly basis or on a yearly basis, right? So in your model of Cloudera, it's the same model that we have at Ubuntu, right? We have to convince and be so compelling to our users that every year they want to buy a year of Ubuntu support from us, right? That's how we make our money. So service providers and the model of offering things as a service basically gives you a reason to be awesome. And if it doesn't give you, if somebody chooses that you're not awesome enough, there's somebody else who's standing next to you who's willing to do the things that are necessary to get that workload, that data moved over. And I think that's almost as evident. Amazon has a service where you can send them a tape drive, right?
Yeah.
And that's yes, moving data is hard, but they've found a way to be able to embrace moving data.
Yeah, one of the best examples there is Netflix. Netflix moved all of their infrastructure, all of it. Amazing story to the Amazon EC2, etc.
You got a utopian panel here, though. 3 open source companies, right? So the reality is that most of the vendors out there don't want you to be able to move their data.
Yeah.
Your data or your code, because that's how their business model works.
Yep.
And it's I can speak from personal experience that it is, I'm sure the others can too, that it's very, very difficult to make money selling free software. And open has a lot to do with free. And
I'm not sure I agree with that, but
popularity of open things has a lot to do with them being free. And that's an important relationship. But there are significant financial incentives for things to not be open.
Okay, so with that, we're over time, so we got to wrap it up here. And sorry we didn't have time for more questions, but our panel will be here for a short period. It's now time for lunch. One thing I wanted to quickly announce is I should have done this earlier. If you are tweeting or anything like that, you've got 2 you can use. I would definitely use the hashtag of SVForum. And then if you'd also like to throw in an extra hashtag, you can say Cloud Day, all one word. So if you're doing that sort of thing. I will be transitioning off of the MC from the morning, and we will be passing the baton to Bernard Golden right up here, or one of my co-chairs. Yep. So it's been a pleasure moderating and facilitating this morning, and look forward to talking to you further this afternoon.
thank you.
Thank you.